Let's start a new chapter, risk and return. In this chapter, these are the major topics that we need to cover. Number one, we're going to talk about return, and then we're going to talk about the risk, and lastly, we will cover the capital asset pricing model. Now, our first topic in this chapter is return. So let's look at the definition of holding period return. So any investment, when you hold that for a time period, then the holding period return is calculated as the price when you sell the investment or the price at the end of the holding period return. So that's called the price ending, plus any cash distribution during the holding period of this investment, subtract the beginning price of this investment at the beginning of this holding period, or the purchasing price of this investment at the beginning of this holding period. And the difference divided by the purchasing price of the investment at the beginning of the holding period. So the price beginning. And that will give us a rate of return in percentage, which we called the holding period return. Now, let's look at a numerical example. So suppose you bought a stock at a price of $1,000 and sold it at $1,200 after 90 days. So 90 days is your holding period. You have also received a dividend of $100 during this 90-day holding period. So what is the rate of return for this investment? Well, by using our formula, the ending price, $1,200, plus any cash distribution, a $100 dividend that you received, minus the beginning price, $1,000, and then divided by the beginning price, $1,000, and that will give you the holding period return as 30%. So for this 90 days investment, your holding period return is 30%. Now, sometimes we need to annualize a holding period return. Why? Because when you face two alternative investment, if their holding periods are different, say one is 90 days, the other is 5 months, then how can you make comparison between these two investments? Well, you can't, because the holding period are different. One is 90 days, one is 5 months, so 150 days. So you can't directly compare these two investments. It wouldn't be a fair comparison. Now, how can you make a comparison between these two investments? Well, if you annualize both holding period return to a yearly rate of return, then you can make comparisons between these two investments. So in our previous example, the holding period is 90 days. So that holding period return, 30%, we calculated is a holding period return for 90 days. So we need to analyze that holding period return to a yearly rate of return so that we can use this rate and compare that with some other investments rate of return. So how to analyze it? Well, it's 30% in 90 days. In a year, how many 90 days do we have? So 365 divided by 90, and that will give us how many 90 days period that we have in a year. That's about 4. So the 30% 90 days holding period return times the 365 divided by 90, that will give us the annualized return of this investment, which is 121.67%. And you can also look at it the other way. 90 days holding period return is 30%. Divided by 90, that will give us the daily rate of return. then the daily rate of return multiplied by 365, how many days we have in a year, then that will give us the annualized rate of return for this investment. And that's 121.67. And this calculation of annualized holding period return does not consider compounding. So let's look at the case when we consider compounding here. What does compounding mean? Well, we have about 4 90 days period in a year. So every holding period return is 30%. And then suppose after you finish the first 90 days investment, and then you roll over that investment to the next 90 days. And then both the principal and the interest will be compounded at 30% in the second 90-day period. And then once the second holding period is over, roll it over to the third 90 days and the fourth 90 days, so forth. So that's considering compounding or considering reinvestment. So if we consider reinvestment or compounding, then the annualized holding period return is 1 plus 30% raised that to the power of 365 divided by 90. Okay, so every 90 days, the compound interest rate is about 30, and then we compound it about 4 times in a year, and then subtract 1. That will give us the annualized holding period return considering compounding. In this case is 189.8%. So you will see after we consider compounding, the annualized holding period return is much higher than the case we do not consider compounding. Why? Well, compounding makes sense because it's compounded both on the interest and the principal, not just on the principal. So in terms of the rate of return, by considering compounding, you will have a much higher rate.